Lately, I've been getting a lot of questions and comments from you all that revolve around two big topics. One is, wow, I had no idea it was that bad. Or is it really that bad? People commenting on or asking about the media's failure to do very basic fact checking. The other topic is about what it takes to fact check, what you look at. It's not as hard or mysterious as it sounds once you find out how to look for original sources and documents and videos that no one's tampered with. Today, I'm going to cover both of these with such a strong and timely topic. It involves this guy. Here's a clip from Rachel Maddow.
Protesters outside rallying on the steps of the state capitol. They also marched outside. They ended up protesting inside, including with some state legislators among them, all to show support for Mohsen Madawi, a Vermonter and one of the international students, also a legal permanent resident, who Donald Trump has arrested, even though he's not accused of any crime.
I often say on this show, truth equals facts plus context. Just referring to this guy as someone not accused of a crime leaves out crucial context. It misleads you. I've explained that Rachel Maddow does probably the best job of anyone I've seen in media of calling out Trump stuff, the mess he's making, the total disregard for basic, crucial laws and balance of power, his disregard for the truth. But when it comes to misleading statements and lies that benefit the left, that boost the favorite narratives of the left, MSNBC generally fails. Now, you might expect that from them, but what you'll hear ahead today is that the biggest mainstream news outlets that don't claim to have a political stance, that pretend to be just about the news, they are whitewashing the reality of who this guy is. Who he is, in reality, is a pro-terror radical with a proven track record that backs up that description. There is a guy in the UK who took the time to look up the actual history and activities of this guy, Mohsen Madawi. This man in the UK is an independent journalist, of course, and that is significant. The big news agencies don't do this. It takes independent folks, well, obviously, like me, and in this case, like this guy, to piece through available documents and videos. He found how this radical, who has been leading a horrible hate movement at Columbia, has lied about his past, about his activities, made up an entire false history for himself with help from the media. Ahead, I'll be speaking with him. You'll hear why it shows that, yes, indeed, the media does not fact check. This is so important. So much of the media doesn't understand that if you want to win over the public, you need to report the whole truth, not just the parts you like, while hiding or obfuscating the parts that you don't like. People are rejecting media failure. Today, how this story shows what it takes to fact check and why the media is endangering America. That and more coming up on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. So good to have you here. I'm Josh Lebs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which is pretty much the only thing in existence that fact checks the mainstream media. We are at the very beginning of the second year of this show, and I'm so grateful to you for listening and to everyone who is supporting. Let me say at the top, I was hoping my voice would be entirely back to normal by today. You might be able to tell it's still recovering. I got a cold recently, which annoyed me. I never get colds, but hey, fact check, we all do. All right. Anyway, with each episode, I send out a newsletter. Actually, I've been sending out multiple newsletters packed with links, videos, images, and more information. It's free. There's also additional content that paid subscribers get, including I show my paid subscribers how to access virtually any news article for free, legally, with no paywalls, so you can stop sending your hard-earned money to news agencies that are failing to get you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I'm happy to say recently, the platform for the newsletter, Substack, informed me that They Stand Corrected is now a bestseller, which is very exciting and very cool. And what it means is that people are figuring out that it's worth it. Back when I was on NPR, public radio, I used to do a lot of fundraising, and I would help people realize how much money they spend on coffee every week. My monthly rate for being a paid subscriber to the newsletter is so low, there's a very good chance that you spend more on coffee in a day than you would to get full access to the paid version of my newsletter in an entire month. Plus, the numbers associated with it, you'll see, are significant for what they represent. Anyway, check that out. You can find it joshlevs.com/newsletter, or just look for the link in the show notes. Or if you're on Substack, just search They Stand Corrected. All right, enough business. Let's dig into this. This guy, Mohsen Madawi, ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, managed to arrest him recently. And now, of course, he has become another preposterous cause célèbre for the mainstream media. I've also told you about another guy from Colombia, but today focusing on this one. Anyway, this has brought new attention to him, and the media has been presenting him as a perfect, peace-loving hero, which is insane. The media should be making clear that even this guy should get due process, and the Trump administration should not deny anyone due process. The media should be able to do that while also telling you the truth about him. And that means ensuring that whatever they report is true and not just letting people lie in the pages of their websites or newspapers or on air. That is not happening. The CBS News show 60 Minutes did a story about him in late 2023, which has been getting renewed attention lately. Other news agencies have been quoting from that. This guy is from a stretch of land that is known by different names around the world. And I've explained this in previous episodes, so I'll keep it really brief here. The most common name in English for this stretch of land is the West Bank. That's because Jordan occupied it. For a much longer part of history, it was known as Judea and Samaria. Some people still call it that to this day. Anyway, it's west of a river, the Jordan River. That region is separated into 3 areas. Area A, where this guy is from, is where almost all Arab citizens of the West Bank live. It's under the control of the Palestinian Authority, not Israel. In the 60 Minutes interview, here is something this guy, Mohsen Madawi, claimed about his own childhood.
I see an Israeli soldier pointing the rifle at us, and he shot my friend in his chest.
You were how old?
I was 10 years old. And I still remember when we put him in the grave, I held him and I shook him. I said, Hamida, wake up, wake up. He didn't wake up. And I told him, I promise, I will revenge.
Now would be a good time for me to tell you, I am not a cynical person. And even I know that when you hear something like that, every red flag should go up. That is a story out of a movie. What 10-year-old seriously does that, burying his dead friend and shakes him and goes, I shall avenge you, or I will revenge you? Really? Here's a basic rule. Always check the checkable facts. That brings us to this independent journalist in the UK, David Collier. He did that.
I saw what you saw, which is the red flag. You listen to him and you think, oh, come on. It's scripted. It's absolutely scripted. And the fact that nobody bothers to ask him any questions ever. And he's been pushing this. This is a particularly important lie because he's built his persona in the United States on the back of this tragic upbringing that he's had. I did what every single journalist in the United States should have done. If he was 10 years old, and he says he was 10, and I know when his birthday is, that gives me a period of 365 days during which this death must have happened. Now, there is a website called B'Tselem. They're an Israeli-Palestinian NGO. They're of the far left, really.
This is a group that blames Israel for anything it could possibly come up with, and you're still using their information.
The best way to debunk these people on the left is to use their own sources against them. They have a complete list of every death that took place in the Second Intifada. I know where he was from. I know which refugee camp he was from. So I know where this death must have taken place. And in the period he was 10, not a single child died in that camp. So it is simply impossible for that statement to be true.
David looked for any death of a child at all in that area where this guy claims this thing happened. There's nothing like that. The only thing involving a minor was a couple years later when people were battling Israeli forces and some canister exploded? Okay, back to David.
He's talking about something that took place by his school, in the alleys. He's running into a house. All of these things. It's impossible. So we know 100% for sure that Mohsen is spinning a story that is just not true.
And in another sign of how fact-checking works, David looked at a speech this guy gave.
He's always put it that the best friend wanted to go and throw stones at the Israeli tanks. In this story, because he obviously wants to make his friend even more of a martyr, suddenly his friend's no longer throwing stones. And he says, my friend wasn't even throwing stones. He was holding a basketball. I was the one that wanted to throw. And you can see that this person is a manipulator who picks his audience.
David also looked at what this guy, Mohsen Madawi, has said elsewhere, including in an Al Jazeera interview. If you're new to this show, you should know I did an episode about Al Jazeera and how the mainstream media refuses to tell you that it is factually a Qatari state-owned propaganda operation. Anyway, here's a clip of this guy on Al Jazeera.
When I was 12 years old, they killed 7 Palestinians from the refugee camp. In the middle of the night, I collected their body parts with my own hands. I peeled their skin off the wall. I put their body parts in plastic bags. No child should experience this. I was 12 years old at that time.
That line, that no child should experience this, might be the only true thing Madawi said.
Between 2000 and 2005, a total of 4 people died. The first 2, I think, were targeted strikes. They were terrorists outside the camp the Israelis had gone for. This isn't internal refugee stuff. So, absolutely impossible for this to have happened. He might be talking about Narnia. It's crazy that any journalist has looked at this person and taken him seriously.
I told David this is what happens inside news agencies. People want to believe this stuff, so they don't fact check. It takes people like us to come along and look. David also looked at a write-up about this guy in something called The Gothamists, which is part of New York Public Radio. In this show, I've told you about NPR being one of the leaders of the big lie of the left, the anti-Israel stuff. New York Public Radio, WNYC, is an NPR station. Anyway, this site, The Gothamist, is one of the places in which this guy, Madawi, told another part of his alleged background.
There's a story he says about his uncle, that he found education because one day when he was sitting by the grave of his friend, the uncle comes and sits next to him at this imaginary grave. And he gives him this life lesson that education is the way out. That is clearly a fiction that has been fashioned for the American audience. Because if you go back to just where he's filling out the visa forms, trying to get access to your country, he appears in the magazine for his campus, because this guy is a professional student. I mean, he does, 17 years on a campus and never gets a degree. He appears in this magazine and he talks about his uncle. But the message from his uncle in the magazine is one of a patriotic nationalist. And he's going to follow in his uncle's footsteps. His uncle died fighting the IDF.
These news sites could have checked this stuff. David found that this guy, the uncle, was, shocker, a terrorist. And there's more that the media won't tell you. Something else that Mohsen Madawi did.
He set up a Facebook group. And this Facebook group was all about honoring terrorists, either prisoners or dead terrorists. This is what he was doing in the 2 years before he arrived in the US. One of the videos, I found it, he shares footage from one of the terrorist houses. There's a funeral for him. They start singing the Kaiba Kaiba chant, the religious chant that they use in reference to a historic massacre of Jews that took place. It is a jihadist chant. It's anti-Semitic and genocidal to the core.
Here's sound from that chant in the video David found. It celebrates one of the many, many massacres of Jewish people by Muslims. And understand this, it's being celebrated. They're saying, oh, Jews, the army of Muhammad will return. It is a call for new slaughter. And yet, a recent New York Times headline about this guy said, well, I'll tell you after this.
Somebody lied. as plain could be. Somebody lied just to show you're born. Somebody falsified to me.
The reviews we're getting are amazing. 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. One of them came from Todd Rogenthien in Austin, Texas, who also sent this message.
If you are not listening to They Stand Corrected Weekly, then you are doing yourself a disservice when it comes to understanding the media and the way that the sausage is made. Josh gives you an accurate behind-the-scenes look into the inner workings of the media. I know this because I spent 2 decades working in television news myself. Never before has a podcast like this been so necessary, especially in the current political climate. Josh, keep up the good work, and great job to your team as well.
Thanks so much, Todd. Everyone who gives this show a great rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a great rating on Spotify is doing this show a great service. It's free, it only takes a minute, and that is how those algorithms know that they should recommend this show to other people. So, if you want people out there to learn the truth, one of the best things you can do is rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So, you've heard how independent journalist David Collier went and looked into claims that this pro-terror radical from Columbia University, Mohsen Madawi, has been making. And based on what David Collier found, it's a pack of lies. You may be wondering whether these news agencies are now acknowledging getting anything wrong. Here's what David told me about that.
There is probably no one outside of Mohsen and possibly, although I doubt it, the US intelligence services who know more about Mohsen's background than I do at this point. And yet not a single mainstream US outlet has bothered. I mean, they've seen it, but the posts went viral. They don't want to know. It doesn't suit their narrative, so they have no interest in talking to me. That's inexcusable. The only person that has contacted me from the US, I'm talking to him right now. You.
That's pathetic, but not surprising. By the way, I personally contacted CBS News. Of course, I have not heard back. As a rule, these places just ignore this stuff and hope it will go away. But that's why this show is so important. It's not about me, whether I'm alive or not. The earth is still round. Facts exist. I know from being inside the media all these years, it takes a big public platform exposing these lies and failures to get the media to do anything about it. That's the only thing that works. Anyway, that's Mohsen Madawi's background. What has he been up to in the United States? Here's David Collier again.
There is an argument being put forward that he used to be pro-terrorist and now he's not. But what has he been doing for the last year? He's been standing in a campus, calling for the destruction of the Jewish state, radicalizing students, baiting the Jewish students who are there. What's changed? It's not like he's on some yoga camp somewhere. He's doing exactly what he's always been doing.
Here's an example. You may have heard about the Bibas children. These were these 2 beautiful little boys, a baby and a small child, Arab citizens of Gaza who identify as Palestinians, kidnapped them on October 7th, along with their mother. They killed her. They also killed the babies. This is tough to hear, they strangled them and then pelted their dead bodies with rocks to try to make it look like they were killed in an Israeli bombing, according to forensic analysis. First, they gave Israel different bodies in hopes that Israel wouldn't figure it out, and then Israel did figure it out and got the actual bodies, and Israel has scientists. It wasn't hard to figure out what happened to these kids. Okay, before the world learned that the Bibas children were killed, a small, brave group of students at Columbia stood across from this anti-Semitic horde of hateful pro-terror people on campus. This small group was calling for the release of the Bibas children. This guy, Madawi, was the leader of the other group, and even that was too much for him. He couldn't even accept people calling for the release of the Bibas children. So here's what he did instead. He had a blowhorn and a device that played the sound of a siren really loud, which he went and did right up in their faces while smirking at them in order to drown them out without having to use his own precious voice. Here's sound from that. And yet, here's how the New York Times described this guy in a headline. Quote, "He wanted peace in the Middle East. ICE wants to deport him." No. I've explained in a previous episode, there is a specific law saying people on green cards cannot endorse or espouse terrorist activity or be part of a group that does or persuade others to do so. And I did an interview with someone who fact-checked what this group at Columbia has been doing, endorsing and espousing terrorist activity. At times, these news agencies have acknowledged that, but then they suddenly forget it when it's inconvenient. Here's a clip from NPR in which this guy's attorney, Luna Druby, claimed this about why he has been detained.
Solely because of his identity and solely because of the speech on behalf of Palestinians, his own people.
And then NPR played a clip of him from 60 Minutes saying this.
To be anti-Semitic is unjust. And the fight for the freedom of Palestine and the fight against anti-Semitism go hand in hand, because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Yet again, an obviously memorized quote from a guy who exacerbates anti-Semitism and celebrates terrorists who kill Jews. Vermont Public Radio, meanwhile, quoted a Jewish person, of course, saying that this guy is somehow not anti-Semitic and completely opposed to violence. There's always someone to say that. They could have fact-checked this stuff. And of course they didn't. By the way, you can see videos of all these things in there that David put together. I'm making them available in my newsletter. I encourage you to check it out. And that's not all that Mohsen Madawi has been up to.
When his cousins got killed not long ago, he posts this thread accusing the Israelis of assassination and of shooting them unfairly or unnecessarily in the head. Well, these two were terrorists. They were armed. And they were fighting. And you know what? If you're a terrorist and you come up against the IDF, good chance you're going to get taken away. And that's what happened. But he's deceiving everybody. Another one of his cousins was part of the Islamic Jihad. He knows this. But when he posts about it, he's not mentioning it.
The movement this guy is a part of is so similar to far-right nationalism.
If the left were looking at this and we were talking about people who were white, who were talking in English, they would start associating or attaching, am I dealing with far-right nationalists here? There's something really twisted about the way that somehow the Palestinian cause has become embedded in the left.
Absolutely. It's the horseshoe theory. The far left and the far right are extremely similar. And I say this on the show, and I say this in my newsletter, both causes are anti-democratic fascist. What you have on the far right is white Christian nationalists, or in the case of Russia, there it's not even really about Christianity. It's just about far-right nationalism. On the left, you have Islamist fascism. And in both cases, you're talking about religious rule that takes away basic rights, that erases LGBTQ protections, that erases women's rights. People on the left are every bit as radicalized as people on the right. The far left and the far right, they're very, very similar.
It's very toxic. And because social media is almost a self-radicalization tool, once these people get involved in their little echo chambers and their little bubbles, it's really dangerous from whichever side you're coming at.
The media itself does this, and the media allows people to do this, to pretend that support for terrorism, that support for violence are perfectly okay as long as they are done on behalf of quote unquote Palestinians. That is all over the media. People on the left are incapable of hearing this. Killing Jews was fundamental to the foundation and the creation of the Arab Muslim Empire and of Islam. And the Arab Muslim Empire beheaded the Jews for being non-believers. You can have a peaceful version of Islam. You can have a peaceful version of any movement. But among a huge number of people who are Muslim, this is still something that's worshipped, still something that's praised. And if you praise them and turn them into heroes, then you're going to make things so much worse and so much more dangerous.
Part of the problem is that we're not addressing it and we're not criticizing it and we're not pulling them up on it. As you mentioned, there are peaceful forms of it. So the only way you can push back against this is if you challenge it. If you let them walk through your cities and walk through our streets as we do, chanting this stuff, they're just going to carry on doing it. My expertise obviously is in Europe and in the UK, and we are way in front of you on this, and we are in deep, deep trouble.
And, you know, we shouldn't have to say this, but it always starts with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews. Even people who don't care about Jews should care about Islamist rule increasingly overtaking their society. And People on the left think that it's Islamophobic to suggest that that's happening, but it's happening before your eyes. It's happening in Europe, and it will happen here if America doesn't take a stance against it. The far right is dangerous, and so is the far left. Trump is doing horrible things, and a stop clock is right twice a day. Just because his administration is doing a thing doesn't make it wrong. These folks should be getting due process, and they have done horrible things and know they don't stand for peace and should not be here, and they have violated green card rules.
And that is where we are now. Our government is pandering to the Muslim community because it would be difficult for them to win power without them. I place so much of the responsibility of what we're going through on mainstream media, because if it's the role of anybody to be investigating this and telling the people the truth about what is taking place in society, it should be the mainstream media. If not them, then who? It's their role. This is what they're there for. And to find that they're actually the ones that are working against us, that they're actually the ones that are helping spread the lies and the fictions, it's a really scary place to be. You're right. It's just not journalism.
We have to be able to talk about this problem without fearing that acknowledging it is Islamophobic. It isn't. This is not about a person being Muslim. It's about Islamists. Of course, there are awesome Muslim people in all walks of life, obviously. Two of my favorite interviews that I've done on this show were with these awesome folks, one from Bahrain, one from Egypt, part of a group called Sharaka that's working for peace. If you didn't hear that, I'll put the links in the newsletter so you can find them easily. And the guy from Egypt is a political analyst and brave in telling the truth. He talks about how a bunch of governments across the region are horrified by what Hamas and other Iran-backed terrorist groups are doing and want to prevent that from spreading. He talks about what he calls the new evil axis. It really is kind of amazing that crazy people on the far left in this country are supporting this, while a bunch of Arab leaders are recognizing how dangerous it is. Anyway, so much more to say. Plus, well, you'll hear. I'll be right back. Amid all of the awful things going on in America and around the world, it can be easy to lose sight of some, but especially given the topic of this episode, this is an important time to address something: the continuing nuclear threat from Iran. That is a threat to democracies everywhere, not just the United States and Israel, although it is a threat to both of those. Iran sponsors the world's worst terrorism, from October 7th to other attacks. It supports Hezbollah and the Houthis, which have attacked U.S. soldiers. I just mentioned the political analyst from Egypt who talked to me about the evil axis. Well, he put Iran at the center of that axis. It is crucial for the United States to do everything it can to dismantle Iran's nuclear program. And that brings me to this very quick ask of you. There is a new petition. It has just come out. It's very brief. It'll take you about 20 seconds to read the whole thing. I encourage you to sign it. I only encourage you to sign petitions that I sign. Thanks to a sponsored partnership, if you use my unique link to sign this petition, then a little bit of money comes to this show. So you're helping this show for free while also taking a very important stance. You can find that link in the show notes or at my newsletter. It begins with this thing called bit.ly, bit.ly. That's just how these short links work. You'll see. Share my unique link with everyone you've ever met and make sure they sign it too right away, because this only works for a limited time. Thank you. I am one person and don't currently have the resources and time to do all the legwork on every story. So it's so great to be able to interview other folks doing this, like David Collier. Also, you should know David is not alone. Another independent journalist, Eitan Fishberger, looked into the same guy and found similar evidence. You can see all that in the links in my newsletter, and you can get there through the show notes. Next week's episode is already underway. I've got stuff for you about a major news network blowing it on Russia and democracy. Also, a follow-up on the White House Correspondents Association dinner. I told you last week what a disaster that annual tradition was. And more coming up next week. As always, I want to hear from you. There are two great ways to get in touch. The best is for paid subscribers to the newsletter. You get to message me directly, and you can join comments there, and you get exclusive content, a bunch of cool stuff. The other system is that there is a form anyone can use. You'll find it at my website, joshlebs.com. When you get there, you'll see the link to the form. It's a really cool form, and it's designed in a special way that makes sure your message gets to me. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week. Before you go, one quick idea. Think of someone you know who might be particularly interested in this episode. Click the share button and send this episode to that person saying, I really think you should listen to this episode. In this era in which people are so overwhelmed with content from the moment they get up to the moment they go to sleep, getting a note from someone they know saying, I think you specifically would find this interesting, that is often the most impactful thing to help people discover this show. Thank you.